Anshali. I teach at Spark Public School. I started teaching in class 2 and now they're in class 3. This is the first year intervention class. And my mom actually told me about the Teach for India fellowship. So I figured, okay, like masters is finished, might as well see how the fellowship will go. And my purpose was very simple, just to, I had come with the mindset of doing social work, that I will teach kids and poor kids who are coming from all these backgrounds, and it was a very selfish motive that I wanted to feel good about me contributing to society. And obviously that has changed ever since now that I'm at the end of the fellowship, that there's been a huge shift on where I began, what was the purpose I began with, and what have I learned and what my purpose is now. What we saw happening in Kashmir and what we saw happening in Delhi and what is happening right now, I think one common thread that you can see is the quelling of protests, oppression, not being able to say what you want to say, not being able to ask questions, not being able to make choices for yourself. These two issues were really important, and which is what jolted me towards doing something about it. And my first question was, then where is my responsibility? What am I to do? And this was also a time when I couldn't go back to Delhi and join the protests because I had my classroom to take care of, I had my kids, I had to educate them. So what can I do with my children in terms of education to make them responsible, so that tomorrow when they grow up, it's not that we're just doing RC in class and maths in the class and learning all these skills of compare and contrast and stuff, but what is that adding towards? So I think education is just a tool, but towards what end is something I started thinking about. And I think my role as a teacher changed because I moved from, oh, okay, you should speak English properly, or your RC levels should go up, to more about, but why are you learning what you're learning, and what is your responsibility in the classroom as well as a citizen of India. I broke it down into something as simple as exposing my kids to what is happening around the world. I did a lesson where I divided the class into the short people and the tall people. And tall people were sitting on one side, short on the other side, and I told the short people, you're not allowed to do these things. I took away their badges and I told them you can't be monitors, because actually I've read a study that short people have smaller brains. So sorry that you can't ask questions, you can't participate in my class. If you have any doubt, too bad, I'm not going to solve it for you. I have to focus on my tall people, they are important for me. Initially in year 1, it was less about outcomes and more about, are the kids having fun in class? Are they feeling happy in class? Even in my reward system, I made sure that there was more of shabash and good job and celebrations and stuff. So they start feeling something about themselves. They're not just robots who are still and just following rules, but they become happy about who they are and they start having self-respect for themselves. And once that was there and I had a little bit more relationship with them, then too much relationship, because they stopped listening in my classes. Then there was shouting and all, then I'd just be like, okay, now how do I handle this? So then I got a tracker in my class. I think initially I was also a little scared of using the tracker because I did not want them to be extrinsically motivated. But I did feel that was important for my BMC and for setting a little bit discipline in class for me to do my lessons smoothly. I think what I'm glad is that my notion was wrong, because I did do away with the tracker at one point. Once they started paying attention to lessons and they started engaging with lessons, they started having fun, was a time when I had to just let go of my tracker, and they were listening because they wanted to listen, which is intrinsic motivation. So only for some lessons I would take IP mastery data, otherwise I never really did data driven instruction. It's only in my second year when I remember I had an ODC with Richa, and she introduced me to Kirkpatrick's model, where she was like, okay, so where do you think you are? And I was like, this is insane. I'm just at a level 1 reaction where I think that my kids are doing well and they've had mastery because they're feeling happy or they feel satisfied. So then she was like, now as a fellow, you need to make a choice on whether you want to move ahead on the ladder. Do you think that's fair to your kids? Because you are here for a purpose. You are doing all these amazing lessons, but what is the impact of these lessons? And that's when I started taking IP data a little more seriously. And when I started getting the data back, I understood that there was a lot of gap in my RC lessons and my EVS lessons. I feel like one of the first few proud moments for me were the peer tutors. As they were working together, I realized that it's not like Chetan M had asked him or anything. Vishnupriyan, of his own accord, saw that there was a need for Chetan M in the class. He sat down next to him. He was willing to sacrifice his PT class and sit and teach him. And after he did it and I called it out in class, the next day I had 5 peer tutors and 5 students in the class. And this is what gave me the idea for a peer tutor structure. I think an important lesson for me there was that it's the children who need to make the decision for themselves for things to work out in my class and not the other way around. But now when I look at my class, what I'm really proud about is them raising their voice and being really vocal about corporal punishment happened today to us, Didi, and for no goddamn reason we got hit by the teacher and they were using sticks, and every time they see a teacher walking with a stick, they're just like, she's walking in with a stick. We have to tell Anshali ma'am, like, it's not okay. I mean, shifting from it being something normal to it being completely not okay was like a proud shift that I saw in them. I told them, I was like, you know what, this is going to be your thing, you're going to come up with an action plan. I'm just going to throw in perspective now and then, but I'm not going to plan this for you. This is going to be something that you are going to do for yourself. And I was pretty proud with the solutions that they came up with. They came up with some very sensible things, like we'll complain to our parents, then our parents will go and talk to HMM, but we'll complain such that we tell exactly what she's doing in class and how it's, you know, when she's beating us, how are we feeling when she beats us. So we'll tell all this to our parents, they will complain. For the parents who can't come, we'll just make our parents write diary notes in our diary. What about if they don't know English, then ma'am, we will write in English and parent will just sign for us. And when we also started putting that pressure on the HM and the parents also started coming to her and complaining about the Kannada teacher beating, a memo did go out from the HM where she was like, teachers are not allowed to use sticks in the classroom and they're not allowed to beat the students in the classroom, no corporal punishment. So to some extent their solution was effective. This was an important moment for them to go through because they realize that if they come together and they organize and they put some perspective about stakeholders together, they can solve the problem to some extent. And I think that feeling of problem solving was something that drove them to then start thinking about problem solving as a vision component that I also had in my classroom. I do imagine that my kids are going to pass their class 10 boards. That's the most important, nearest goal that I can imagine. That's something that I've communicated to them again and again. After the boards, going to college, and I know that's going to be like a very difficult sort of challenge for them to overcome. So I also keep thinking about the kind of jobs that they would have after college. It should be a job that makes them financially independent and financially stable so that tomorrow they are at a level where they can have houses like you and I have. It's not like the financial is something which is holding them back. My hope is also that they will have a clear understanding of who they are, what are the opportunities out there, and they're able to push for the best fit that is going to be the best fit for them. What changed in the second year was when I had a different HM, is that I started having conversations with her, basic conversations like good morning ma'am, good afternoon ma'am. And I also made my outcomes very visible to her. When she saw that I am working hard in my classroom and I'm showing outcomes in the classroom is when she started seeing me differently. There was a different level of respect. There were some privileges that I got now and then, like if I had to leave early sometimes, she'd be like, okay. But if you don't have that relationship, you don't get these small privileges. Autonomy in my classroom. I went from having to explain everything I'm doing to not explaining anything at all. She would just trust me and she'd be like, I know you're doing a good job in your class, so it's okay, you do what you have to do. If you don't believe you're a leader, you're not going to be proactive in doing what needs to get done so that everyone is on board and everyone is doing what they have to do. So I think when I started taking a little more charge and consciously started thinking about what is the kind of teacher I want to be and the teacher as a leader that I want to be in the classroom, my approach started changing a little bit. So building relations was a part of me understanding who is a leader. Me dealing with uncertainties instead of, just getting pissed off and being like, I'm not going to lesson plan because it never goes according to my plan, but more like, I'm going to plan for those uncertainties to the best of my ability. Since in year one, being a strong teacher in the classroom was important to me, I feel like I paid a lot of attention to the training sessions. And I was fortunate because my PM Tejas was someone who did a lot of training sessions for his LC. Those training sessions really enabled some of my own practices. And then the lesson planning clinic. Now, I as a person used to take at least 5 or 6 hours to do one lesson plan. Because it used to take me so much time, that was also a disabler for me. The TLL was also there for us as first years as well as for second years. And I feel like in my year one, the TLL just helped me get a lot of inspiration for the work that I do. So we would see a lot of videos of TFA teachers, Teach for America teachers, and the kind of things that they are doing in their classroom. And this was also a time when I was able to identify my key levers for my classroom. So I definitely feel like TLL had helped me become a strong teacher while my PM was also pushing for things in his LC. So I was lucky in that my training manager and my PM both were very, like they brought in practices that helped me with my teacher practices. Generally in second year also we had a lot of rigorous sessions. Rigor and relevance was one session which I really took back and incorporated in my lessons afterwards. And Ashwini from TLL was the person who did my observations and ODCs for about 3 cycles. Ashwini was an elementary teacher as a fellow, and she had some very simple practices that you can use on an elementary level. Because of conversations with Ashwini, I was pushed to doing relevance very consciously in my lesson. And I think from there it became like a more normal thing, from something so ambitious to something more simple, like why are we learning this? How does it help us? Just if you ask just these 2 questions in your lesson, you can bring purpose and relevance to the forefront. So I started doing that, which I've learned from Ashwini. If I think about my leadership journey and my fellowship journey so far, I do feel like continuous learning is something that has played out multiple times in the fellowship. So I think self-enrichment and my own learning is very important to me, but at the same time, in terms of the impact that I want to have, I think I've realized it's not so much about the impact but more about who I impact. So I definitely see myself staying in the social sector. And when I think about some competencies that I really enjoyed and I'm taking away, I feel like teacher training is something that I'm really interested in, and that's not something that I immediately am getting into post the fellowship, but I think largely the idea of mentorship is something that stands out to me, helping people reach a potential that they're happy with. So definitely enabling people to be at a better place very broadly. And in terms of education, in terms of continuous learning, always being aware of what are the different ways that students are learning, how is student learning happening, what are some teacher practices that are helping student learning to be expanded. So I definitely see my role in these 2 areas. In the fellowship, in a way, every day there is some or the other struggle, but I feel like the fellowship just makes you stronger because you have to overcome these struggles if you want to teach your kids. Fellowship is very important to do, and this is the narrative that I'm leaving with, is that I feel like after you do the fellowship, a lot of the other things just feel very like I can do this. Because you've done the fellowship, you've been through 7 days work weeks, you've been through people calling you a failure, you've been through your students absolutely hating you and shouting at you when you enter to being absolutely in smart positions and ready for you because they are aligned on the purpose of education that you are at. So I feel like all of these challenges, as in when you overcome them, just make you stronger.